Well, we had arrived at the base of the switchbacks about 7 a.m. morning. Took about 2 hours to cross over the switchbacks, and about 6 more hours travel from Skykomish to Seattle. They serve trout along the way, fresh caught trout. As early as 1859, Emery C. Ferguson and Edson Caddy had trekked through the valley to a mountain pass, a route that had been used by the Skykomish to cross the Cascades to visit and trade with tribes on the east side. Ferguson and Caddy named the spot Caddy Pass, but were blocked by heavy snow. They returned in the spring to improve the route, but mining in eastern Washington had died out, and the plan was abandoned. In the late 1880s, prospectors looking for gold, silver, lead, and copper followed Ferguson and Caddy's rough trail on their way to the mining areas of Silver Creek. By April 1890, Amos D. Gunn and his wife, Persis, had arrived from Kansas and purchased a squatter's claim with a small log cabin serving as a miner's hotel, Caddy Lodge. They constructed a larger building that became the primary hostelry and supply depot for those heading east to the towns of Galena, Mineral City, and Monte Cristo. Persis Gunn was impressed by Index Mountain, which looked to her like a index finger pointing towards heaven. Thus the name Index was chosen when a post office was established in December 1891. The name did not originate with her, however, as Index Mountain was on the maps long before the Gunns arrived. It does look like an index finger if viewed from the west, but it was renamed Mount Baring in 1917, and the mountain to the west, called West Index Mountain, was renamed to Mount Index. The Gunn settlement prospered not only through the need for lodging and supplies by the miners, but because of the 1890 surveys for the Great Northern Railway. John F. Stevens hired Amos and his son Luther for horsepacking a survey crew up to Caddy Pass, in tandem with Stevens' survey of Stevens Pass. Track building from 1891 through 1893 added to the influx of laborers needing accommodations. The town of Index is a riverside hamlet in the shadow of a 5,979-foot mountain, Mount Index, in Snohomish County. It is hemmed in by the North Fork of the Skykomish River to the south and by a steep granite cliff, the town wall, to the north. The area was home to the Skykomish people before the European immigrants came to mine the mountains and log the forest. The granite wall was to become a large quarry in 1904. Mining, logging, and quarrying defined the town's prosperity early in the 20th century. At its height in 1905, the town's population reached 500, with perhaps 1,000 more in the surrounding area. With the loss of mining, quarrying, and logging in the 1930s, recreation was to become the prime means of employment. First people of the Skykomish Valley, called the Skykomish. The Treaty of Point Elliot, signed in January 1855 at Mukilteo, created a single reservation at Tulalip, northwest of Everett. It's for indigenous people living along the Snohomish, Skykomish, and Snoqualmie rivers. That was the beginning of the end for the Skykomish people. The extended group of families for whom the river was named, for there are no people left who identify themselves as purely Skykomish. 7 village sites existed between present-day Monroe and Index at the time of white contact in 1850s. Easternmost was a village near the confluence of the north and south forks of the Skykomish River. Here the members of the Skykomish group were called the Fern People. Not surprising in an area with an average of about 100 inches of rain per year. A large potlatch house was located here in a permanent winter village. Elders of the tribes that settled at Tulalip told anthropologist Colin Tweddle that the Index people were the genuine Skykomish tribe. Rather wild, they would come up in canoes and suddenly be gone, hidden in the rocks. Coming to town by a river, as pioneers did in many Snohomish County communities, was never a possibility for Index settlers. The river was too swift and hazardous for navigation by steamboat. Early pioneers came by horse on rough trails until the Great Northern Railway was completed in January of 1893. Then transcontinental trains and 2 locals called dinkies provided reliable transportation. The depot was literally at the center of the community. The county road to Index and Galena was completed in 1911, and as autos were developed and roads expanded, including Washington's first scenic highway, following the 1911 road directly through town, and competition from the Index Stage Company became serious. That bus service lobbied to expand its route to the top of Stevens Pass via the new highway to Wenatchee, opened on July 11, 1925. Once the extension was granted, the Great Northern stopped service of the beloved dinkies, which had delivered postal bags and passengers every morning and evening except Sundays. Monroe, once the site of the Great Northern Railway's botanical gardens. Fresh flowers for the passenger trains were once grown there. Each day these flowers would be loaded aboard the Western Star for distribution throughout the system so that each dining car passenger might have fresh flowers with their meal. Snohomish was founded around 1858 by Emory C. Ferguson, E.F. Caddy, and others. It was originally known as Caddyville, but changed its name to Snohomish City in 1871. The name Snohomish comes from the name of the dominant local Native American tribe. One of the first inland cities in the Puget Sound region, Snohomish was built where a planned military road connecting Fort Steilacoom and Fort Bellingham was set to cross the Snohomish River. The road, proposed in the wake of the Pig War, was intended to be built far enough inland to be safe from British naval attacks. Although the road was never completed, Snohomish quickly became a center of commerce in the expanding region. In 1861, Snohomish County was separated from Island County and the village of Snohomish was voted the county seat. It remained so until 1897, when the county seat was relocated to the larger, yet much newer, neighboring city of Everett, after a controversial and contested county-wide vote. The land on which Everett was founded was surrendered to the United States by its original inhabitants under the 1855 Treaty of Point Elliot. Permanent settlement in the area by European descendants started in 1861 when Dennis Brigham built a cabin on a 160-acre claim on the shore of Port Gardner Bay. Over the next several years, a handful of settlers moved to the area, but it wasn't until 1890 that plans for platting a town were conceived. On September 1st, 1890, Henry Hewitt filed a bond on the north end of what was to become the Everett town site, beginning the process of acquisition that would become the Everett Land Company, later along with Charles L. Colby and Colgate Hoyt. In October 1890, the Hewitt-Colby Syndicate decided to name their industrial city after Everett Colby, the 15-year-old son of investor Charles L. Colby, who had displayed a prodigious appetite at dinner. Everett Colby, in turn, was named for Orator Edward Everett. On November 19, 1890, the Articles of Incorporation for the Everett Land Company were filed, with Henry Hewitt, Jr. as president. Everett was officially incorporated on May 4, 1893, the year the Great Northern Railway came to town. Both Hewitt and Rucker brothers had speculated that James J. Hill would make the town the terminus of his railroad. However, Hill continued the railroad along the shore of Puget Sound on into Seattle. Although it succeeded in building the city, the Everett Land Company was a failure for its investors. The outside investors withdrew, and the company's holdings were transferred to a new company controlled by Hill. The Ruckers, who helped broker the deal, stayed in Everett and became leading citizens of the young city. The Treaty of Point Elliot, 1855, Land Settlement Treaty between the United States government and the nominal Native American tribes of the greater Puget Sound region. This is in the recently formed Washington Territory. One of about 13 treaties between the U.S. and Native nations in what is now Washington State. The treaty was signed on 22nd of January, 1855 at Point Elliot. It's now Mukilteo. And ratified March 8th and April 11th of 1859. Lands were being occupied by European Americans since the settlement of Washington Territory began from about 1845, and the whites needed to get these people out of the way. By and large, native leaders were willing to sell their land, although they had utterly different conceptions of land use and no cultural comprehension of European American property rights. They rejected proposals for their relocation from Puget Sound country. Signatories to the Treaty of Point Elliot included Chief Seattle and Territorial Governor Isaac Stevens. Representatives from the Duwamish, Suquamish, Snoqualmie, Snohomish, Lummi, Skagit and Snohomish, in order of signing, and other tribes. The treaty established the Skykomish, Port Madison, Tulalip, Swinomish, or Snohomish, and Lummi reservations. The Native American signers include Snoqualmish and Duwamish, Chief Seattle, Snoqualmo and Snohomish, Chief Patconam, Lummi Chief Chowithoot, and Skagit Chief Goliah. The treaty guaranteed both fishing rights and reservations. Reservations were not designated for the Duwamish, Skagit, Snohomish, and Snoqualmie peoples. Seattle's location, harbor, and commercial development made it a logical place for the Great Northern's terminus, and Hill had the good sense to engage the persuasive and influential Thomas Burke as his local agent. Having previously achieved the creation of Railroad Avenue, Burke had little difficulty persuading the city council over the vociferous objections of the Northern Pacific to give the Great Northern a 60-foot right-of-way down the middle of the wood-planked roadway. The Great Northern reached Seattle in 1893, and by 1895 there were 4 transcontinental rail lines jostling for position on the waterfront. Seattle finally had its continental connections and a rapidly burgeoning international trade. Japan's Nippon Yusen Kaisha shipping line contracted with the Great Northern in 1896 to begin regular steamship service between Seattle and Japan. Hill soon launched his own ocean liners, the Minnesota and the Dakota, which carried passengers and goods from Smith Cove to China, Japan, and the Philippines. We transferred in Seattle to the little Greyhound of Puget Sound, the Flyer, said to be the fastest steamer in the world. Mark sat on the deck of the Flyer watching the baggage smashers removing our trunks from the baggage car to the truck, which was to convey them to the Flyer, and exclaimed, "Oh, how I wish one of those trunks were filled with dynamite and that all the baggage destroyers on Earth were gathered about it, and I just far enough off to see them hurled into kingdom come." Flyer was the first vessel ordered by the Columbia River and Puget Sound Navigation Company, a concern formed by Captain U.B. Scott and others, which already controlled the fast stern-wheeler Telephone on the Columbia River, and on Puget Sound the then new and fast stern-wheeler Bailey Gatzert, as well as the express passenger boat Fleetwood. Flyer was built at the Johnson Shipyard in Portland, Oregon, of Douglas fir, cut in Oregon and prepared for construction by prolonged storage in salt water. Unusual for an express passenger boat, Flyer included a dining room, which eventually contributed to her great popularity. Flyer was designed to be the fastest propeller-driven vessel in the Pacific Northwest, and was very fine-lined, that is, tall and narrow. Captain Scott was so proud of his new ship that he rode on her as she was launched into the Willamette River. This proved to be a mistake. Neither boilers nor engines had been installed in Flyer before launch, and without their weight deep in her hull to act as ballast, she simply flopped over in the water, and Captain Scott had to exit by climbing out a window. After that, another hull was built around her with the hope of making her a little less top-heavy, but this was imperfectly sealed, so water sloshed around in between the hulls for the rest of the vessel's operational life. Surprising, this did not affect the Flyer's speed, although she did acquire a permanent list to port, or at least the hint of a list. Once finally completed, the company sent Flyer to Puget Sound and brought Bailey Gatzert around to the Columbia River to run with a telephone. Flyer was powered by a triple compound steam engine. It was a duplicate of one installed in J.P. Morgan's yacht, Corsair. The engine drew national attention at the time it was built. It rose above the passenger deck, and passengers used to look forward to a chance to watch the huge low-pressure cylinder, almost 5 feet across, drive the vessel at high speed. Flyer was originally a wood burner, consuming 24 cords of wood during every day of operation. Her firebox could hold 2 cords of wood at once. Although her engine was capable of generating 2,000 horsepower, 1,500 kilowatts, at 200-pound steam pressure, at no time was she ever equipped with a boiler that generated more than 150 pounds of steam. Thus, her engine never could produce more than 1,200 horsepower, 890 kilowatt. Flyer was placed on the run from Seattle to Tacoma. Her first master was Captain Harry K. Struve, and her first pilot was Captain Henry Carter. The run was 28 miles long one way, and the Flyer routinely completed it in less than 90 minutes. This was the beginning of many years of successful, timely service, so much so that the Flyer's advertising slogan became "Fly on the Flyer." The future successful career of the Flyer was almost ended at midnight on June 14, 1892, by fire. This started when Flyer was taking on wood for fuel at the commercial dock in Seattle. Suddenly, fire broke out. Within 5 minutes, the fire had swept through the vessel. The fireboat Snoqualmie and all available units of the Seattle Fire Department responded to the fire. They were able to get the fire under control before serious damage was done to the hull or machinery. However, all of the vessel's upper works were destroyed. Flyer was quickly rebuilt and returned to service by the end of the summer of 1892. She made 4 round trips a day from Seattle to Tacoma. Flyer ran an average of 344 days a year and was considered highly reliable by the population. In 1908, it was calculated that Flyer had completed enough trips from Seattle to Tacoma to go around the world 61 times and had carried over 3 million people, more than the population of New York City at the time, and this without serious injury to any passenger. This does not mean there were no accidents. Over the years, Flyer was involved in a number of accidents, collisions, and fires, including some serious ones, which threatened the lives of those on board her or other vessels. We arrived in Tacoma at 5 o'clock and have sumptuous apartments at the Tacoma, a grand caravanserai built by the Northern Pacific Railroad Company. The receiver is an old friend of mine, formerly a contractor on the Northern Pacific Railroad. I also found another old friend in C.H. Prescott, one of the prosperous. He is a local receiver of the Northern Pacific Railroad, the highest distinction a man can attain out here. This is another overgrown metropolis. We can't see it, nor anything else, owing to the dense smoke everywhere. Here in Tacoma, the ladies are to remain and rest, while Mark and I take in Portland and Olympia.